We continue now at the top of Daf Memvav Amud Beis Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 46b. On the previous Amud, Rami Bar Chama asked if somebody bows to a mountain, can the stones from that mountain be used for the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara continues and explains the question, Yesh nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoa, is there din of nevad when it comes to something attached to the ground with regards to gavoa, with regards to the Beis HaMikdash? O ein nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoa. Or maybe when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash also, we're not going to be strict by the Beis HaMikdash either, since it's mechuber lakarka, therefore it is not a problem and it can be used for the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Im Tim Salomar. Now, if you're going to say, Yesh nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoa, that there is a halach of nevad by mechuber when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, but still we can ask, machshirei carbon ke carbon damu, this is just machshirei carbon. In other words, there is certainly a din of nevad when it comes to an animal. Let's say, for example, an animal is worshipped, so we say the animal is mutter to hedyot, but you can't bring it on the Mizbeach. But that's an actual carbon. You can't bring the animal as an actual carbon. Here we're asking about using the stones for the Mizbeach, which is machshirei carbon. That Mizbeach is going to be used to bring a carbon. So are we going to say that machshirei carbon is ka-carbon damu? Machshirei means like the preparation for a carbon. Do we say that machshirei carbon is considered the same as a carbon in this regard, o lo or not? And Rashi explains, V'im tim salomar yesh nevad eitzel gavoa. If you're going to say that there's a concept of nevad when it comes to gavoa, when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash again by mechuber, akati mi boile, you could still ask as follows: Hi nevad de lav lekarbon gufe kaboila. In this case, the nevad that we want is not actually being used for a carbon itself. Ela lebinyan mizbeach. It's just to help build the mizbeach. The machshirei carbon, which is preparation to bring a carbon. Mi amrinan ke carbon dami v'nevad aser behen. Low again, do we say that we treat that like a carbon and therefore nevad is going to be forbidden or not? That is the question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Kal v'chomer, we can make the following Kal v'chomer to answer the question. Uma esnan shemuter betalosh lahedya. When it comes to an esnan is a payment a person pays to a prostitute. So the halach is, let's say for example, the payment was detached from the ground. That does not become forbidden to use. Somebody who's a regular person can use that. But the halacha is, and the Gemara is assuming this right now, aser b'mechuber legavoa. It's going to be aser even by items that are attached to the ground. It's going to be aser to be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Techsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Lo savi esnan zona umechir kelev. You're not allowed to bring the esnan zona. Again, that's something that's used as payment for a zona, for a prostitute. Mechir kelev is something that was the price of a dog, in exchange for a dog. So that you're not allowed to bring to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara understands, Lo shna talosh, v'lo shna b'mechuber. It doesn't matter if it's talosh, if it's detached from the ground. It doesn't matter if it's mechuber. In all cases, it is going to be aser beis Hashem elokecha. That's the finishing of the pasuk. It says again, Lo savi esnan zona mechir kelev beis Hashem elokecha. It's going to be aser ligavoa. So that's true again when it comes to esnan. And if that's true when it comes to esnan, and that's true by mechuber as well. So nevat. So when it comes to something which is worshipped, she'aser betalish lahedya. Now, if something would be worshipped as Avoda Zara, it would be forbidden for a regular person if it was detached from the ground. So eino din she'aser b'mechuber ligavoa. So we'll make a kal v'chomer, and we'll say that if it's attached to the ground as well, it should be prohibited lagavo, it should be prohibited for the Beis HaMikdash. Again, because the idea over here is that nevad is something that is aser betalish lahedyot. That is not true when it comes to esnan. Esnan is mutter betalish lahedyot, and yet we're very strict when it comes to gavoa. Therefore, we should also be strict by nevad when it comes to gavoa. But the Gemara continues, Amalei Rav Huna bereider Rav Yoshua l'Rava. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, he says to Rava, he challenges this kal v'chomer. Because because we could actually just reverse. Because again, as we mentioned, when it comes to the fact that by esnan it's aser even b'mechuber legavoa, that itself is sort of an assumption by Rava. So we can actually reverse things and not make that assumption and say as follows: Uma nevad she'aser betalosh eitzel hedyot. If when it comes to something that's worshipped as Avodah Zara, it's forbidden when it's detached from the ground to a regular person. Mutter b'mechuber legavoa. We can suggest that that is mutter when it's attached to the ground legavoa. Again, if we're talking in reference to the Beis HaMikdash, and we can say that from the pasuk. Shenemar, as it says, Eloheim Aloharim v'lo Aharim Eloheim. We said that the gods are on the mountains, but the mountains themselves are not considered the gods. They're not considered the idol. So we can make that assumption and assume again by mechuber that it's actually mutter by mechuber legavoa. Lo shna lehedyot v'lo shna legavoa, because we can make that assumption that we don't make a distinction between between a regular person or the Beis HaMikdash when it comes to things attached to the ground. So then we can say as follows: Esnan, when it comes to that which is used as payment for a prostitute, Shem mutter betalish lahediyot, which again is mutter when it's detached from the ground to a regular person. So we can maybe say that Eino din Shem mutter b'mechuber legavoa. Maybe Esnan, when it's attached to the ground legavoa, it should be mutter by mechuber in the Beis HaMikdash. And v'imi shum Beis Hashem Elokecha. And if you're going to say, well, the pasuk says Beis Hashem Elokecha, it sounds like anything cannot be used, even mechuber. But no, mi boy le'lechiratanya, you can use the pasuk of Beis Hashem Elokecha for the following: Beis Hashem Elokecha. It says again in that pasuk about Esnan, it says Lo savi Esnan zonam lecharkela Beis Hashem Elokecha. What's that phrase teaching us? Parat lepara she'ena ba lebayis. That comes to exclude a para aduma. A para aduma is not actually brought to the Beis HaMikdash, and so an Esnan could be used for para aduma. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say that Beis Hashem Elokecha is actually l'rabos. It's to include esarikuim. Plates of gold that were used as payment for a prostitute, they cannot be used to decorate the Beis Hashem Elokecha for the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi explains, Asr b'mechuber legavoa. Again, the Esnan is Asr even if it's mechuber, even if it's attached to the ground. It's Asr to use in the Beis HaMikdash. V'afil l'machshirei carbon, and that would be true even for preparation for a carbon. T'chseb Beis Hashem, like it says the house of Hashem. T'mashma afil l'binyan abayis. It's mashma that even if you're using it to build the Beis HaMikdash, which is preparation to bring a carbon, Uchsivin, it's written Esnan stam. It just says Esnan. Loshna talish v'chulu. Again, according to Rav, we don't make a distinction between talish and mechuber when it comes to Esnan. But then Rav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua said you can argue the reverse. O Chilaf, argue the reverse. Kevin de lo mashkachas krab behead. We don't find an explicit pasuk, the Yasar Esnan b'mechuber legavoa, that says that Esnan is Yasar even attached to the ground legavoa. Elamisham de cross damaksiv is just because the pasuk just says it's tam without making it clear. Asar de le b'mechuber, you assume that it's forbidden by mechuber. That's what you Rava assumed. V'hadar you'll laugh to nevad minei, and then you learned out nevad also li surah, that nevad also would be Yasar based on the kal v'chomer again, even by mechuber. But according to that logic, we could just say the reverse. Because if you want to just go by the fact that the pasuk doesn't specify, by mechuber as well, nevad we say is going to be permitted, and so then we should say it should be permitted even when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. We could say that it means even in the Beis HaMikdash it's permitted if it's attached to the ground. And then we can learn Esnan from there to say that Esnan is actually permitted if it's attached to the ground. V'imishum Beis Hashem. Now maybe you're going to ask, well, the pasuk says Beis Hashem by Esnan. Uvois lememar debayis have mechuber. Maybe you'll try to argue what the Gemara means to say is maybe you'll try to argue that a house by definition is attached to the ground. V'kasar, and yet it's saying that it's prohibited. V'darash lehachi, and then you would learn it as follows: Lo savi Esnan shel bayis. Don't bring an Esnan of a house, meaning of something attached to the ground. Shim nasan labayis be'esnena. Let's say, for example, a house was given to her as payment for the prostitution. Asr lahakdisho l'tzorch b'nei habayis. So it would be usher to consecrate that for the needs of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara said, no, Beis Hashem Elokecha is used either for what Rabbi Eliezer says, or the Chachamim, Hahumi boile para aduma she'ena ba lebayis. It could be excluding para aduma. The halacha of Esnan doesn't apply there. Sheshchitasa b'harazesim, because the para aduma was actually slaughtered on harazesim, not in the Beis HaMikdash. T'chsiv v'hotzi osol michutz lamachana. That's what it says in the pasuk. Or according to the Chachamim, it includes the rikuim. Let's say you have golden plates. You use that as a covering for the wall of the Kodesh Kadoshim, like we say in Shkolim, the Kevan Denoy Hu Mitzar, since that's something for the beautification of the Beis HaMikdash, the Chachamim say, therefore, it is Aser. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei, Rava responds to Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua, Ano Kamina L'chumra, my Kal V'chomer actually results in a stringency, because I'm saying that Nevad, even if it's Mechuber L'karka, is Aser in the Beis HaMikdash. But Viat Amr L'kula, but when you make your Kal V'chomer, it actually ends up resulting in a leniency, because you're saying that when it comes to Esnan, that actually should be permitted, B'mechuber. But Kula V'chumra, if you have a choice between making a limud that goes as a leniency or a stringency, L'chumra Parchinan, we're always going to ask towards the stringency, and that's why my way of learning, says Rava, is correct. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, Rav Papa said to Rava, V'chol heicha di'ika kula v'chomer, anytime you have a situation where you can make a kal v'chomer l'kula to the lenient position, or l'chomer to the strict one, l'kula lo parchinan, we don't ask l'kula, is that really true? Is that really a rule? V'ha'azod to Pesach, but what about sprinkling on Pesach? We'll see Rashi in a moment. To pligi Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Akiva, there we have a machlokas tanoim between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. To Rabbi Eliezer savar l'chumra, because Rabbi Eliezer says that we're strict over there. V'kamachayev Mechayev le lagavra, he obligates the person. Rabbi Akiva lekula upatar, and Rabbi Akiva is the one that's lenient over there and he exempts the person. V'kaparach Rabbi Akiva lekula, and Rabbi Akiva asks, and he's asking for a leniency. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, hey shiv Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbi Akiva responds, o chilaf, or we can reverse it. Umah hazoh shehi misham shavus, if when it comes to sprinkling, which is a shavus, it's an isur d'Rabbanan, eina docha Shabbos, it doesn't push off Shabbos. So shchita shehi doraisa lo kol shekain. So shchita, slaughtering, which is an isur doraisa, so that should certainly be true. And the point over here is, you see, isn't he making the same kind of argument, but he's making it lakula? So what does Rava mean that we don't make these kinds of arguments lakula? And the Gemara responds, Hasam over there, Rabbi Eliezer Gomre Vayakar Le Talmud. Rabbi Eliezer actually had taught it that way, the way of Rabbi Akiva, but he forgot his learning. V'yasa Rabbi Akiva Latchure, and Rabbi Akiva was coming along to remind him. And the Gemara continues, V'hainu Damarle, and that's what Rabbi Akiva was saying to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Al Tachbireini B'shas Hadin. He said, Rabbi, do not deny my argument at the time of judgment. Kach Mekubal Ani Mimcha. This is what I received from you. Hazah Shavus, that sprinkling is a d'Rabbanan. It's an Isser d'Rabbanan on Shabbos. Ve'eino doches HaShabbos, and it doesn't push off Shabbos. And Rashi explains, Hazah de Pesach, the sprinkling by Korban Pesach, Tamei Meis, Shechol Shvi Shalo Lios B'Shabbos Be'erev HaPesach. The case over here is, a person is Tamei Meis on the seventh day when he's supposed to purify himself. That falls out on Shabbos, on Erev Pesach. The question is, should he purify himself on Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach, in order to bring that Korban Pesach? Rabbi Eliezer don Kal V'chomer L'chomer. Rabbi Eliezer, he said we should learn a Kal V'chomer and be strict. The Katani, because it says, Rabbi Eliezer says, V'yoleo ani don, I make the following limud. If slaughtering, which is a malacha d'oraisa, can push off Shabbos, zusha mishum shvus, here where the only issue is a d'Rabbanan, eino din shetidcha v'yaza olav, shouldn't the halacha be that it should push off, and meaning we're going to do the sprinkling on Shabbos, v'yischayv b'Pesach, which will result in a chumrah, that he's now chayev in Korban Pesach. Rabbi Akiva parach l'kula, and then Rabbi Akiva asked, in response, he asked as a leniency. He said as follows, u'patur mi Pesach, he said the person should be exempt from Pesach. The Katani, as it says over there, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva said to him, O chilaf, let's say the reverse, mahazod mishum shavus eino docha Shabbos. If sprinkling, which is the Rabbanan, is not docha Shabbos, shchita de mishum malacha hi eino din shelo tircha. When it comes to slaughtering, also it shouldn't be pushed off. Alma kal v'chomer lekula parach. You see that he is willing to bring the kal v'chomer lekula as a leniency. And Rashi continues, Hasam over there, ahu o chilaf to Rabbi Akiva. When Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Eliezer, o chilaf, that it should be the reverse. Lo salka adaita to Rabbi Akiva lemedayne ulememer lo sirchi shchita Shabbos. Don't let it enter your mind that Rabbi Akiva is seriously arguing that the shchita, the slaughtering of the carbon, should not be docha Shabbos. El mishum Rabbi Akiva haya mekubel uva me Rabbi Eliezer atzmo shahaya rabo shehazah eina docha Shabbos. The point over here is Rabbi Akiva was simply saying he had a tradition from Rabbi Eliezer himself. Rabbi Eliezer was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva had a tradition from Rabbi Eliezer that the hazah, that the sprinkling is not docha Shabbos. Vayakar le Talmud, and what happened over here was that Rabbi Eliezer forgot his learning. Rabbi Eliezer, nishtaka chimenu halacha, again the learning of Rabbi Eliezer, he forgot the halacha. Uvoi lemeidan mikal v'chomer hazah mishchita, and again he wanted to make this kal v'chomer, he wanted to learn from shchita to hazah, didachia, that hazah should be docha Shabbos. That's the stringency Rabbi Eliezer wanted to say. V'yasir Rabbi Akiva lad kurei gemara, and Rabbi Akiva just wanted to remind him of his learning. V'yamr lemilsa beloshan ochilaf, and he phrased it in this way of ochilaf. V'doyin kal v'chomer shchita me hazah, he made it as if we're learning a kal v'chomer in the other direction. Shchita from hazah, the lo sitche, that just like hazah is not docha, so to shchita should not be docha. Now, afal pi Rashi notes, even though that's an impossible kal v'chomer, to havada shchita dachia, certainly shchita is docha. If you have a situation where you have to bring a carbon, so it's going to be docha Shabbos. The slaughtering of the carbon will be docha Shabbos. The chsiv, as it's written b'moado, in its time, v'afilu b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. And Rashi continues, Ela kihechi the nasiv Rabbi Eliezer lelibe. The reason why Rabbi Akiva is presenting it to Rabbi Eliezer in this manner is that way Rabbi Eliezer would consider lamemer, he'd consider and say, Kevan de kayalef hay shchita me hazah. We're learning now shchita from hazah. The lo sitcha, that it's not docha, meaning just like hazah is not docha Shabbos, so to shchita is not docha Shabbos. So vaday pshita le b'hazah de lo dach. It's obvious then again that the sprinkling is not going to be docha Shabbos. So he presented it in that fashion, so Rabbi Eliezer would come to that conclusion. And Rashi notes, Umi lo estaya milsei v'lo idkar. Now really it wasn't successful, and he didn't actually remember. Elohachi ahadrele. Rather, what ended up happening was Rabbi Eliezer Eliezer responded to Rabbi Akiva as follows. He said, Akiva, karta mashakasa b'Torah. Akiva, according to your argument, you're uprooting what it says in the Torah. Bein ha'arbayim b'moado. It says the word b'moado, like we just mentioned. V'afilu b'Shabbos, it means even on Shabbos. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, and then the conversation continues. Rabbi Akiva said to him, Have li moed la'elu lahazo lahavaso michutz latchum kim moed l'shchita. Bring me that you can apply the word moed by sprinkling in the same way you can apply it when it comes to slaughtering. Now, just to say to him directly that I have a tradition from you that Hazah is not Docha Shabbos, that wasn't proper derech eretz. Already that would be embarrassing to say that he forgot his learning, and that's why again Rabbi Akiva presented it to Rabbi Eliezer in this argumentative fashion. And Rashi continues, that's what he said to him, don't deny it at the time of judgment. Show me how this is a moed like by shchita. Ka'as Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer got angry. V'amar lo Akiva, he said to Akiva, b'shchita hashivtani, b'shchita tehei misascha. You're trying to respond to me, refute me with an argument about shchita. You should die through shchita. V'amar lo Rabbi Akiva, and then Rabbi Akiva said to him, Al tachbireni b'shas din zeh shanu chalukin v'donin zeh keneged zeh. Don't deny this to me at the time of judgment that we're arguing with one another. Al techached divarecha rishon. Don't deny your early words. V'zocher mashalim edatani hazah shvus. And you should remember what you taught me about Hazah, Shvus, etc. Alma minei gamarle. The point over here is you see that ultimately Rabbi Akiva, he learned it from Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asks the following question: if somebody bows to a stalk of wheat, mahu lemenachos, can you use that wheat for karva mincha? And the question is, yesh shinoi benevad, is there a din of shinoi, physical change, by something that's worshipped as Avoda Zara? O ein shinoi benevad, or is there no such din as physical change when it comes to something that's worshipped as Avoda Zara? And Rashi explains, now, lehedyot mishra shari. First Rashi says, to a regular person, it's not a question, it's permitted. Because again, this is attached to the ground. That's not usher to a regular person. The whole question here is, if it's able to be used, legavo, as a carbon. Imtim salomar yesh nevad b'mechuber, and this is an imtim salomar. If you're going to answer the question we asked above and say that there is a halacha of nevad by mechuber etzel gavoa, by mechuber there is a halacha of nevad in terms of the Beis HaMikdash. So hachamai, but here what would be? Kevon dehadar tachinlu. The reason why it's a question further over here is because over here it's not like, let's say, an animal which you're bringing directly as a carbon, or let's say the stones of a mountain you're using directly on the mizbeach. Here you're going to grind up the wheat. So therefore, yesh shinoi benevat. So do we say that there's a halach of shinoi, physical change? To lo mitzvah legavoa lebeine. Maybe it's only asr legavoa if it's right in front of us. Aval heicha de ishtani shaper dami. Maybe if it changes, then it's okay. So again, the way Rashi's presenting this is an imtim salomar. If you're going to say that there is a halacha even by mechuber that we say it's asr legavoa, but the question is, here you have a case of mechuber and also shinoi, maybe it should be permitted. Awein shinoi benevad, or maybe there's no such halacha of shinoi by nevad, v'yasr, in which case it would be asr to lomahani le shinoi, because the shinoi is not going to be effective. That's the question of Rami Bar Chama. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar Zutra Breder of Nachman. Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Nachman, says, Tashma, come and hear the following proof. And this is from a Mishnah in Tamura, Kol ha'asurin l'gabi mizbeach, anything that's asur to the mizbeach, valdosein mutarim, so their offspring are permitted. Vitani alon, we learned on that, Rabbi Eliezer osur, that Rabbi Eliezer says that it is prohibited, it's forbidden. And Rashi explains, Kol ha'asurin kagon muksa v'nevad, again, something designated for Avoda Zara, worshipped as Avoda Zara. Rabbi Eliezer osur, and Rabbi Eliezer says that it is forbidden. Again, so it's a machlokus in terms of the offspring, whether they are permitted or forbidden. And Rashi says on Rabbi Eliezer osur v'kasal kadai tachashta, right now we think, to be behema mu'uberes, we're talking here, let's say it was an animal that was pregnant, sheravo ishtachav alo askinon, and then there was either bestiality or the person bowed to it, that's what's happening. Uviyesh shinoi benevad kamefalgi, and this is exactly the machlokus. A machlokus tanoim, whether the shinoi is effective to permit it by a case of nevad. The Tanakama says yeshinoi benevad. The Tanakama says there's a concept of shinoi. Hilkach valdosein mutarin. Therefore, the offspring are permitted. Why? To make kara uber, because originally it's a fetus. V'hashta behema. Now it's an animal. That's a shinoi. For Rabbi Eliezer, silver ain't shinoi benevad. And Rabbi Eliezer says there's no concept of shinoi. Alma plug sehi. And so the Gemara is saying, you see from here that this is a machlokus tanoim. But the Gemara continues and says, V'lav itmar Allah, but wasn't it stated on that Mishnah Mishnah. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, that Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avua says, Machlokes kishenirbu levasof ivru, that actually this machlokes tanoim is specifically when the bestiality happens and then the animal became pregnant. And Rashi explains, V'lav miyitmar Allah maravar Rav Nachman machlokes kishenirbu levasof ivru, uchidim mefarish betmura bepera kol asur, and this is explained in Tmura. The Tanakama savar zev v'zeh gorim mutter, the Tanakama holds this is a case of zev v'zeh gorim, because the animal, when it becomes pregnant, so it's becoming pregnant from the mother animal and the father animal. You have two causes, and therefore the Tanakama says mutter. Rabbi Eliezer savar zev v'zeh gorim asur, and Rabbi Eliezer holds zev v'zeh gorim asur. Isn't that the explanation that we give to that Mishnah? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph.